Been doing a lot of talking today, so if the voice starts giving way or I need to take a break and grab some water, it's not you, it's me. So just to give you a quick overview on why I'm involved in this and why I'm the person trying to give you an overview of Trestle. My name is Norman Beer. I am not actually an employee at iCarnegie. I had left iCarnegie about 2.5, going on 3 years ago to take a position back at CMU with the Open Learning Initiative. But prior to this point, I had spent an awful lot of time at iCarnegie. The organization had originally been founded as a nonprofit part of the university, and I joined it at that point. And so I was there with part of the team that spun it out of the university as a for-profit organization, and was there for a good 10 years. In fact, one of the reasons that I left was that I vowed at one point that I wouldn't work at any single place for more than a decade, and so I think I left a couple of months before my 10-year anniversary. My role at iCarnegie had at that point been as the director of our training and development program, but I ended up really filling a lot of different shoes over my time there, and some of that had been in mentoring, some of it had been in course development, and then an awful lot of time helping to lead our instructor training and support and development program. During those points, I spent an awful lot of time first helping to design and then helping to implement the Trestle system, and after that I made an awful lot of use of it. So the context for all of this is that as you move back into the Trestle system, they were looking for someone that had a lot of experience with the workflow to talk you through getting some of that initial usage, and thus here I am. So just real quickly, could the two of you, do the two of you know each other? I guess would be a good first question.
No, I do not.
All right, so maybe the two of you could give a quick introduction just to make sure that we all know who we are and what you're working on.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. My name is Gloria Santon. I am currently mentoring 6 teams for the Java 2 programming at iCarnegie. This is my second session. I mentored a couple teams in the spring of this year to complete that session, and currently shadowing those instructors. I graduated from CMU in 2010 in the master's program for software engineering, and I've been a software engineer for a little over 10 years, and this is just a change of pace for me.
Excellent.
I'm Nancy. I have 11 Mexican instructors that I'm mentoring for the SDP4 course, which is the Data Structures and Algorithms and Performance course. I actually designed the course with another person and wrote most of the materials for the course, or a lot of the materials, most of the materials for the course. So I'm a software engineer, have been for a very, very long time, and that's about all I have.
Okay, perfect. Thank you both. That's actually really helpful because it'll give me a little bit of places where I can tone the presentation through specific to the software development background that you have. Much of my history in presenting this material, as you probably guess, is to folks for whom English is not their first language. And so if there are places where you feel like I'm going a little too slowly, or I'm breaking things down into pieces that really aren't necessary, please don't hesitate to let me know. Similarly, as we keep going, please don't hesitate to ask questions, interrupt me. I think that there's always a real challenge when doing webinars in trying to make it something that's interactive and something that we're working together, rather than simply something where I'm here yapping at the phone. And so, as you've got questions or ideas, please don't hesitate to jump in. So my understanding of the context for this, the need for this training, is that for much of the program, there had been an attempt to leave the Trestle system and make use of the Moodle system. And so over time, it wasn't going to be adequate to the needs of the program. And so there's been a decision to go back and begin using Trestle again. And so I think one of the things that's important here, sort of beyond the specifics of training you in the interface and how this works together with workflow, is to understand some of the specific context behind the Trestle's development plan. Trestle is a product of a pretty specific time and place, and a lot of the decisions that went into its making were built not just around what we needed the system to do, but also what the technology was capable of. And so the reason that I want to talk a little bit about this context is that if you occasionally find yourself asking, why in God's name does the system work in this way, or how can I get what I need to get done in this environment, it's often helpful to remember why it was built and sort of work through in that way the ability to think about it in context and use that to solve problems. Beyond understanding where the system comes from, as the contact with your faculty, you're going to end up being the folks that need to talk them through both the initial use of the system and provide ongoing support as they run into problems and have issues. Most of the time, what we see is that it's faculty who are teaching these students first Carnegie course that end up in the role of needing to introduce them to the system. And so sort of beyond just teaching them to use this as instructors, you also are going to need to prepare your faculty to introduce their students to the use of the system. And so, all of this ends up being a place where it's helpful for you to get this overall guidance. I think one of the challenges that you'll have in the current mentoring setup is that you're not going to have the opportunity to really actively teach using the Trestle system in the classroom, and so you're not going to have firsthand experience of some of the pitfalls that can pop up and some of the places where it can be made more efficient. And so I think it's important to be pretty attentive to what your instructors are talking about as they work through this, because it gives you a lever upon which to sort of guide your subsequent training. So we're going to talk a little bit about what some common problems are, and then move on to showing you some of the additional pieces of functionality that are available to you as a mentor. Specifically, what do you use this stuff for instructor training and certification? How do you manage exams and activities? And then finally, how do you grade inside the Trestle system? And this is using the web interface. There are some actually additional tools beyond the web interface that are available for the system, but the team had asked me to focus on just the grading via web interface for now. And at some other point, we can circle back and look at some of the other tools to make your life easier. Let me warn you that we are limited on time, and as I mentioned, I haven't really been actively engaged with either this software or the company in about 3 years, and so I'm not going to be able to really talk well about how the system can integrate with the current workflow. There's certainly been changes in how people were trained and how people were mentored, and I don't actually know what the specific expectations are for mentoring. Just to give you one quick example, at the when I left the organization, there was an expectation that certification exams were given for every course. The faculty were supposed to grade those, and then as mentors, part of your job was to go through, validate the results of their grading, and mark students as certified or not certified. It's not clear that the chunks of that workflow are still operative, and so similarly, it's not clear that the pieces of the interface that support that workflow are going to make a lot of sense. In this case, I sort of see my job for this training session is to really give you an overview of what's there, how it's been used in the past, and then at some later point we can talk a little more about how the current workflow can be supported by the existing technology. Any questions so far?
No.
Excellent. What I want to work through then is just giving you the quick introduction, start to talk a little bit about the context for this, and then move into the student interface. At that point, we can take a quick 5-minute break, because even if you won't need one, I probably will. And then we'll move over into the staff side of the functionality, which is where some of the more interesting stuff happens. So if you've got no questions so far, I have one. What's a trestle? Why in heaven's name did we name this thing Trestle? What does that even mean?
I have no idea.
Trestle is the framework that holds up a train track.
Oh.
Perfect. So, well done, star student. This is the notion that it is a reasonably complicated system of bridging for a railroad to a reasonably deep valley, we'll say. And so and the system, when you think of a trestle, it usually has this sort of old-timey look to it because of the mechanics that are involved in the engineering of it. So, so why do we call it trestle? What the heck do trains have to do with anything that we're doing here? So one of the That's better. I was trying to figure out why things kept popping up on my email, and I realized it's because I didn't have the volume off. So why Trestle, though? What does this have to do with the technology that we're working on? So sort of the first point is to remember that the Trestle system was built to replace the original LMS that the organization used, and that LMS was called CM Online. CM Online was built as a research project at Carnegie Mellon in the mid to late 90s, and it was the original software that we delivered all of what was then the SSD curriculum on. As someone that started teaching with the CM Online system, it was pretty terrible. And so what we set out to do was take a system that would not just serve our needs in terms of delivering content, delivering assessments, but also would allow us to integrate some of our larger workflow and back office functionality. This is the early 2000s, so we took a look around at what else was out there and questioned whether there was technology that support our needs. And what we really found was that at that point, a lot of the companies, what's become Blackboard, for example, were just getting started. And they tended to focus a lot of their attention on what I think of as the whizzy-bangy parts of the interface. Like, oh, we've got real-time chat. Oh, we've got these kinds of animations. But not a lot of attention on what we think of as learning workflow and educational workflow. So we ended up deciding that we were going to need to build out our own system because we had needs beyond just delivering static content. We needed mechanisms for students to be able to submit code artifacts. We needed mechanisms for grading and evaluating this stuff in a consistent way. And we needed a framework that we were going to be able to build on and expand upon as we went. What we found, though, is that from the lead architect's perspective, there was a real gap between what the needs were and where the current technology was. And then, as he put it at the time, this was not too long before Web 2.0 took off. And so, he said he could see where the current state of technology was, and he could see where things were headed, but we weren't quite there yet. And so there was an awful lot of scaffolding that needed to be built up to really support the kind of educational process that we wanted. And so this context is important in part because you're going to see some things as you encounter them. You say, well, why was the system designed in this way, or why does the interface look this way? And the answer is, well, that's what we do in 2001. So this is the first point, Trestle, because it's a bridge in technology. The second, though, is that one of the other major goals of the program, not just the software, was to build a bridge between what was happening in the instructor's practice in the classroom and the work that students did at home. And there's usually a pretty big gap there. Students aren't used to doing work that gets a lot of responsive feedback from faculty when they work at home. Either it gets submitted after a long time delay, or it gets submitted but doesn't get good feedback. And the Trestle system really focused on what research says is a really effective way to deliver instruction, and that is tying the feedback and the timing of that feedback as closely to the problem-solving context as can be done. The last piece, we call it Trestle because names have an unfortunate tendency to stick. The system architect likes trains and saw this need for a bridging technology, and so he started referring to the thing informally as Trestle. And as time went on, we all started calling it Trestle. By the time the marketing team got their hands on it and said, we really need a better name, everyone was calling it Trestle, including the customer base. And we've never actually been able to effectively change that. So we end up with this name that doesn't always make a lot of sense and requires the kind of explanation that I've just given you. But once you recognize the Trestle as a bridge and the role that the software can play in bridging the educational experience, it makes for a nice tie-in, I think. And I think the last piece that isn't always obvious to folks from Pittsburgh, but that the latest edition of the logo helps show off, is that we've got a thing for bridges here in Pittsburgh, so why not a Trestle? The context that we built this system in was really specific to the way that we imagined our materials being delivered and the way that we imagined validating and certifying student results. And so there was this initial need first, obviously, for a content delivery platform that did allow for students to go in, see static content, work through videos and things, but also to take assignments. We needed to pay a lot of attention to security, and it continues to be true today. The FERPA and ongoing regulations that protection of student data is pretty essential. But there was also an assumption about how these materials would be used both by faculty, and there was need for training faculty to be tracking their training and their certification to allow for their work to be managed in a consistent way. the need for work that could be developed effectively, really bringing in the views of course design experts, faculty, as well as industry needs, and tying all of that in to the mentoring role that you serve. There's a reasonably big distinction here between course developer and mentor, and I don't know how you currently categorize it, but at the time that I was working on it, we assume that the course developer is an expert in a specific technology. They might know a lot about Java, but the mentor is an expert in the teaching of a given course. So it's, you know an awful lot about how to teach the Java 2 course. You know what the quirks of the course are. You know where students tend to struggle. You've got a good grab bag of tricks for how to address common student misconceptions and problems, and you're in a position to support faculty as they work through those same kinds of problems. This is also really reflective of the kind of challenges that I think faculty face. What we saw at the time, and what I think is still true, is that faculty tend to either be, or at least faculty involved with the I-Carnegie program, are often very strong technically, but don't always have a lot of classroom teaching experience. They tend to be adjunct faculty coming in from industry and teaching a few classes here or there. Or for longer-term tenured faculty, they often need to spend so much time in teaching that they're not always able to stay up to speed on current best practices or current technologies. And so the mentoring program was intended to provide this initial bridge up for faculty on both the teaching and the technology side, to provide ongoing support as they continue to teach the courses, and then to serve in a role of validating the work that they were doing and making sure that the certifications that were awarded were valid. The second piece that's important there, though, is that the faculty serve a role of really monitoring what's happening in classrooms and collecting soft feedback about a course that can be fed back to the course development team. The system's very good at capturing hard data, and so you've got a pretty nice loop there where you can review the results of student work, analyze the relationship between working through assignments and passing of exams and achieving of outcomes, and consider this on the hard side. But that can't replace the need for understanding how faculty are using materials, where students tend to be tripping up in ways that don't show up in the numbers. And so I think the mentoring role also serves a pretty key focus in capturing that kind of information. Beyond all of these pieces, the system also needed to serve some purposes in terms of capturing student information. There wasn't a lot of integration with student information systems at this point, and serving back office functionality. Beyond the teaching workflow, capturing the number of enrollments, doing billings, doing invoicing and things. So on the whole, the system ended up needing to serve a lot of complex and sometimes competing goals. This complexity, combined with some of the technological limitations, is I think what led to the initial decision to try to move the SDP program over to Moodle. You can sort of imagine that maintaining and expanding legacy technology is a challenge, and Moodle, as an open platform, has a lot of folks that know how to expand it. It's reasonably easy to hire out the work for it, but what it misses is, I think, a lot of these specific pieces of functionality that come along with mentoring, training of faculty, and tracking of certifications. So at this point, I think that the initial attempt to move to Moodle was recognized as lacking those pieces, and it didn't seem to make sense to try to build out that functionality in Moodle if it was already existing on the Trestle side and already was technology and IP that the organization used. And so the question was, is there a way to open the Trestle system back up and start taking advantage of these pieces for the SDP program? Questions so far?
No.
Good. Sorry, the question so far thing almost turns out to be a verbal quirk on my end when I'm giving webinars, and sort of otherwise you just find yourself talking into dead air and starting to wonder, like, still there?
Is anybody still there?
Yeah, occupational hazard, I suppose. So anyway, these are all of the different pieces of things that Trestle needs to support. And so when I talk about Trestle, on one hand, we talk about it as a learning management system, and that's certainly a fraction of its capabilities. But there's this additional, what I think of as educational management system functionality that it provides. And a lot of this are the workflow pieces, the review and oversight components. And what these add up to, among other things, is actually a great deal of transparency into the classroom, and transparency into what students are achieving and where they're struggling, beyond just the faculty look, but also in ways that allow you as mentors to see a roll up, but also for administrators to look and see in the aggregate, how are students performing in their institution? How are they moving from course to course? and really get a better sense of where their programs are weak, where they're strong, and where they're able to improve things. Your concern with Trestle, though, in this case, really is specific to this mentoring context, and so that's really where we're going to dive in. When we talk about what you are able to do as a mentor, what you're going to be doing is providing overview and support and training for faculty, and so part of this ends up involving the teacher functionality, because the instructors have this need to walk through the system with their students who will also be providing that functionality. And how you divvy that up is really going to depend, I think, on where the current organization is structured. And so this is actually going to be one of the places where the functionality of the system may have diverged a little from current practice. When the system was designed, there was an assumption that a mentor would be a mentor for a course, and so I am an SSD1 mentor or an SDP2 mentor, whatever the specific course is. And so as a mentor in that space, I should be able to take a look at any sections that are running of that course, maybe because I need to look something up, maybe because I'm pinch hitting for another mentor. Normally, over top of that function was someone called a super mentor, that when we've had enough large enough number of instructors running that we needed multiple mentors, and they usually needed someone managing them. So that's the super mentor role. But lastly, there was this role of grading support and grading validation that we called mentor scoring. Sometimes this is a training function where you score some things that the instructor has already scored and allow them to compare how you would score and provide feedback. Sometimes it specifically was validating certification exams. But this was something that could often be farmed out to a smaller team that didn't have the larger people interaction needs, but was really just focusing on the mentor scoring or mentor grading role. At the same time, we're able to do mentoring assignments, as I mentioned, by course, but also by specific institutional iterations of course. So, okay, I'm not just an SSD1 mentor, I'm an SSD1 mentor at UVM, or I'm mentoring SSDP sections at these specific institutions. And we're also able to assign mentoring privileges by a specific section. But what all of this means when you add it up is that what you will see and what sections you have access to are going to be influenced pretty strongly by what your mentoring level is and how specifically you are assigned your mentoring task. Most of the time, what this means is that you have access to more sections than you would expect and more sections than you need to see on a day-to-day basis. I don't know at this point how folks are actually distributed. As I said, I think that we normally did it by course, and then if we needed to break it down, we would do it by institution. Usually one mentor doing nothing else was able to support anywhere from 50 to 100 instructors, depending on what else was going on. So after that point, we started bringing on additional people. But it sounds like you may have a little more diversity there. Are you focused on given institutions, or do you have faculty from multiple institutions? How are things split up?
I have faculty from different institutions, even within the team. So I only mentor one class at a time, but my sections that each team can come from like different universities.
Okay.
Same here. I have instructors from several universities in each of my groups.
So it sounds like it probably makes sense then to simply be doing your mentoring assignments by course, but it may turn out that this doesn't provide you enough fine-grained control, and so that's always something that can end up being restricted down the road. Easy enough.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep this in mind, and with that, we actually want to start walking through the system.